Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the literature of the Harlem Renaissance, and we're fortunate to have with us Alana McLaughlin, who has been with us on a number of occasions to talk about the literature as well as some other aspects of the Harlem Renaissance. And of course, Alana, let me welcome you to the show this morning, and let me again tell you how delighted we are to have you here, and at the same time to remind our audience that you've been with us on a number of occasions. And so why don't you say something about your background, your education, and some of the things that are important in terms of your life that eventually brought you to us this morning, as well as to sort of give us an overview of the topic of the Harlem Renaissance. And I think that by that time we should have completed this first part. Let's start off with that.
Well, my name is Alana McLaughlin. As you said in the beginning of the show, I was born August 27th, 2002, which would make me 10. Also, I am very involved in the church, as you are. You're the reverend, and I'm sort of the only acolyte that ever acolytes every Sunday. Every Sunday. I mean, even if I don't want to do it, I still got to do it. I mean, because that's just what I do in church. And now let's get on to the subject for today, the Harlem Renaissance. If you go up to a random person and say the Harlem Renaissance, they will think about jazzy music, piano, and all these little doobie-bop kind of things. But it was much more than that. Now, the Harlem Renaissance was actually, before people started calling it the Harlem Renaissance, it was called the New Negro Movement. And it was inspired by Alan Leroy Locke. And now, this movement spanned from 1919 to about the mid-1930s, about 1934, when the Great Depression started and the stock market crashed. Well, yeah. And so during this time, African-American writers blossomed. And I mean, French-speaking African-Americans from everywhere kind of bonded together, and that's how they basically had their break. That's like the Harlem Renaissance is one of the basic reasons why we have such good writers today, like because most modern African-American writers were inspired by the New Negro Movement or the Harlem Renaissance. Like writers such as Zora Hurston, she wrote many books, and today we read like Their Eyes Were Watching God. We watch the movies and all these Jonas Watergord. Like we see all these, and you have to think about the Harlem Renaissance, because this is where all these African Americans bonded together to basically start the New Negro Movement. And then there wasn't always literature. There was music, like musicians like Louis Armstrong, like the trumpet. Like, I don't think most people know this, but the piano was a sign of wealth. Like and today you can see anybody playing a piano, like they have pianos in my band class. And then most of these children don't know, like, that was a sign of wealth. Like, that wasn't available to just anybody back then. I mean, like, they just think that they can play piano because it is, but it was really like a privilege back then, and it still is. And so those are some of the things that kind of made the Harlem Renaissance.
Now, Lana, within the context of all of this information that you've given us so far, what would you consider to be the most significant aspect of the Renaissance when you see it within the whole total of the history that we've often talked about on this show? For example, we know that during the Harlem Renaissance, Africans were called colored, and then they came up with a new name, New Negro, and all of those aspects of it. And so while we appreciate all of that information that you've given us, and we anticipate some additional information within that range, when we come back, let's talk about some of the reasons that Africans changed from being colored during the Harlem Renaissance to the so-called New Negro. I think you've given us some indication of this New Negro movement. But for the most part, I think, and we appreciate that information that you've given us, and I think you've demonstrated the kind of ability to continue carrying this information forward. And I think one of the things that we would certainly like to hear you say something about Harlem, in the sense that everybody believed that had you not visited Harlem, then you've never really been to New York, and et cetera, and those kinds of ideas and things that you've talked about with us on a number of occasions, and I'm sure that you're very, very in tune with it, you see. And so I think that you're giving us some excellent information, and we look forward to the second part as well as the final part of this show. And let me encourage our audience to that we'll be back following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she's talking about the Harlem Renaissance. And during the first segment, she gave us quite a bit of information relative to some of the literature of the Harlem Renaissance. But now I think she has agreed that we should talk about what she considered to be the Harlem Stride style. And of course, Lana, let me not only welcome you back to the second segment, but to sort of delve into this idea of the Harlem Stride style as part of your rendition of some of the important events during the Harlem Renaissance. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Now, if you're just tuning in, I want you to know a few facts before we go on with the show. I'm Alana McLaughlin, born August 27, 2002, and today on the show we're talking about the Harlem Renaissance. Now, I started off the show in the first segment with talking about how Zora Neale Hurston influenced some of the writers of today, like Maya Angelou and other writers, and how it was such a big part of African American history. Now, I know you introduced the show by saying the Harlem Stride style, so we're just going to hop into that. The Harlem Stride style was not some kind of dance like the Harlem Shake. The Harlem Stride style was a way of playing piano. Now, it was a very popular way of playing piano. Like, if you had the Harlem Stride style down, then you were it. I mean, because, and plus, the piano was a sign of wealth. So if you had a piano in your house and was able to play it and was able to do the Harlem Stride style on that piano, you were it. I mean, because most people would think that having a piano in their house just made them seem wealthy. But if you also knew how to play it, then that kind of boosted your itness, like your popularity. And so that's what basically the Harlem Stride style is. Now, also in the first segment, we talked about Zora Neale Hurston. Now, she was the writer of the famous book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And it was also made into a movie, which I have seen, starring Holly Berry. And so Zora Neale Hurston and these other people were very influential in this time. And that's when even French-speaking African Americans from the Caribbean and Africa, they came together and they bonded, and that's where they all blossomed, because they helped each other blossom. It wasn't like they were all against each other. I mean, they bonded, they came together, and that's how it started the new Negro movement, or the Harlem Renaissance.
Go on, continue.
Now let's get into the art of the Harlem Renaissance. Well, arts like music. Now, the trumpet and the piano were both signs of wealth and were both big aspects of the Harlem Renaissance. I fortunately know how to play both. And so, I mean, like people like Louis Armstrong and all these other people, they all bonded together to create the Harlem Renaissance. It's not all about arts, and it's not all about literature. But if I had to say that my favorite part of the my favorite part of the Harlem Renaissance would be, I'd say literature, because no matter how time goes over and over and over, you will always have that literature. And maybe that style of music may die down a little bit, and then it'll just be forgotten. Like, maybe rock music might be forgotten in the next millennium, but then you will always have that literature. Like, you can never get rid of that literature. I mean, because if the more it influences people, then the more books they will write. And then when it goes all over the years, they will say, this, I was inspired by the Harlem Renaissance, and that would make people want to look it up. And then that literature would just always be there because it influenced so many people that say, if you wrote a book about the Harlem Renaissance, and then I want to write a book about the Harlem Renaissance, then my kids would want to write a book about the Harlem Renaissance. Then I'd go over and over and on and on and on and on. And then people would still want to be thinking, what is this Harlem Renaissance stuff that all these people are writing about? And then they'd end up to going to Zora Hurston or Maya Angelou, or all these people who were famous writers during the Harlem Renaissance.
Well, Alana, now, being in the 5th grade, do you think that most of your classmates have a fairly good idea of what you mean when you talk about the Harlem Renaissance? And if you don't believe that they do, what could be done in order to bring them around to at least seeing your position in reference to the significance of the Harlem Renaissance? I would imagine that many of them might not have ever heard of
the
Harlem Renaissance.
And if I thought that everybody knew about the Harlem Renaissance, and if everybody knew all this stuff, then I wouldn't be here talking about it, because I want to talk about stuff that I want to bring stuff to light. I want more people to know about stuff. Like Martin Luther King, I'm not going to say Martin Luther King was born, he did this. I want to get into the deep, deep facts of his life. Like, I won't tell the stuff that people already know. People already know that he was a civil rights leader. They knew that he did this. They knew that he did that. But then you have to, but then to really make somebody understand, so you have to go down and down and down and down until you hit gold, basically, something that will intrigue them. And then that's basically why I wanted to do the Harlem Renaissance, because I thought that most people don't know, all they know about the Harlem Renaissance was that it had music, that it was in Harlem, and then that's what most people think, but then it was so much more than that. It inspired the writers of today.
Do you know any writers of today who might have been inspired by the Harlem Renaissance? To give me an opportunity to perhaps get a point of view in.
Like, let's like Maya Angelou. If you were to interview Maya Angelou and ask her what some of her poems or books were about, then she'd say the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, because that's what influenced the African Americans of today, and then some of the music influenced other musicians of today. Like jazz music, like if you think of jazz singers, then you know that they may not be that influenced of the Harlem Renaissance, but then you have to know that a little bitty piece of them had to be influenced by the New Negro movement or the Harlem Renaissance.
And so this is the New Negro movement that gave Africans the real new name from being colored to New Negro, was influential enough, you're telling us, to even change the name of the African race from colored to Negro. Now, how did that all come about? We're going to, during this second segment, I want you to explain to us how all of that came about. Certainly, you've already indicated that this is a significant movement and that it was literature filled and et cetera, but at the same time, how did this name colored, and say some statements in reference to about that name as well, some of the organizations that might be associated with that organization, and then tell us from there about this New Negro. And I think we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she's giving us some information relative to the literature and other aspects of the Harlem Renaissance. And she has agreed to talk about some of the other movers and shakers of the Renaissance during the final period that we have here. As a matter of fact, Alana, we've tried to give you as free a rein as possible to talk about some of the many aspects, it appears, that you've gathered dealing this Harlem Renaissance movement.
Now, before we get into, say, the name changing of African Americans, there's another big aspect of the new Negro movement, well, the Harlem Renaissance. James Weldon Johnson. Now, when you think of James Weldon Johnson, most people don't know who James Weldon Johnson was, why he's important, what he did. He wrote the Negro American national anthem, which is "Lift Every Voice and Sing." Now, I'm sure people's saying that has nothing to do with the Harlem Renaissance. That was a big part of the Harlem Renaissance, because let's see, it was the coming together of African Americans. I mean, because they knew they were getting popular and moving on up. I mean, they had their own anthem, they had books, they were famous writers, famous musicians, famous jazz bands. They were moving up, and they wanted to bond together to make sure the African Americans got their name out there, that they weren't just former slaves, they weren't just to a random person, that they weren't just former slaves, that they weren't just workers, they weren't just cotton pickers, they were something important. And that's why all African Americans, maybe some are more important than others, and maybe some got more fame than others, but all of them were very important. Now, if you had a whole band of famous African Americans and you plucked one out of the group, then it wouldn't really make the Harlem Renaissance, because it was about bonding together. And if it didn't have anything to do with all African Americans, if it was just an elite group of African Americans, then it wouldn't be the New Negro movement, because that's when we came together. If we were all individuals at that time, then it wouldn't make a movement, because you can, but they bonded together to make a movement, a big movement. I mean, because one person probably wouldn't make that big of a movement. They had to bond. And that's what made the New Negro movement. And so they bonded over this song. That was their empowerment song, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." In the title it says, "Lift Every Voice," which is meant get your voice out there, get your boom on. That's what that really meant. And so so that's why I want to emphasize the importance of James Weldon Johnson's song. Now let's go back in time a little bit to describe what basically brought upon the name change African Americans from colored to what?
Negroes.
So at first, they started out as slaves. Then they became colored people. Then they became Negroes, then Afro-Americans, and then African Americans, which is what we are today. And so those are some of the many names, and we were called much more than that. Some stuff I can't see on TV, but I mean, we were called much more than that. I mean, we were segregated, we were hated, beaten, killed because of the color of our skin. And so that brought upon a name change, because they said, well, I'm guessing somebody said, well, hey, let's be Negroes instead of being colored. I mean, because colored has no wow to it. I mean, being Negroes at least has some wow about it. I mean, just being colored just means, like, you could be pink, you could be red, you could be orange, but Negroes specified us. I mean, when you say colored, like if I went up to somebody and said, what are colored people, that would say, oh, they can be orange people or pink people, or hey, maybe even purple people. But when you say Negroes, you know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about me and you, African Americans, colored people. So they want to specify who they were. And over the years, they got more specific about it. I mean, slaves could be anybody. If you weren't white, then you could be a slave, like Native Americans, purple people, orange people, African Americans, black people. But then when you got colored, kind of narrowed it down. I mean, because if you said who was a colored person, I doubt that anybody would say a Caucasian person or a white person. But then when you got Negroes, then you knew exactly who you're talking about. And then when it got from Negroes to Afro-Americans, and you know exactly who they were talking about, even more specific. And then African-Americans, it's not like you can't just be an African-American. There are African-Americans. You can't just be alone being African-American, because you have to bond together to make an African-American. And so that's what, and then some other events brought upon the name change, like nobody just said, oh, let's change our name because we feel like changing the name. Stuff brought upon name change, like, say, since the Harlem Renaissance started in 1919, what are some stuff that happened before 1919? Like, in 1912, the Titanic sank. And other important events happened before 1919, and other important events happened after 1934, like the First World War. And other important stuff happened after the Harlem Renaissance, which ended in 1934. So, like, even this year, we have our first African-American president. And so those are some of the stuff that brought upon the name change. And I feel as if in the future, we might change our name once again, and then again. And again, you don't know how many times we can change our name, but that's just some of the stuff that brought upon the great name change.
And this is your information in reference to the Harlem Renaissance, and you think that young people like yourself should be much more aware of the significance of all of these things that you're talking about.
Everybody should be aware of it, not just African Americans or colored people. I mean, everybody should be aware of it, because no matter if you're black, white, pink, purple, it affected everybody. It didn't just affect African Americans. I mean, because if you went up to, like, I know there's not purple people in the world, but if you saw somebody that was purple and you asked them, do you think you were affected by the Harlem Renaissance? Yeah, because of the music they listen to today, or in band, the instruments they play, or if they're pianists, the piano that they play was all a part of the Harlem Renaissance. Like the Harlem Stride style, they were affected by this. Everybody was affected by it. It wasn't just African Americans, the African American community, it was everybody.
And do you see any relationship between the kind of music that was played during the Renaissance and the kind of music that you listen to today?
Now, say the trumpet, you can look up any Rachel Ferrell song, and I'm sure you will find even if you don't hear a little bit of trumpet in that. And she's a famous jazz singer. She had to be influenced by the Harlem Renaissance, because that's when trumpets became famous. And if you look up say a Beyonce song, I'm sure you can find a piano version of that. And what was that inspired by? The Harlem Renaissance.
And so the Harlem Renaissance has a much greater impact upon American history than
it didn't just start and stop. I mean, if you start something, you can't just end it when you feel like ending it. It goes on and on and on and on and on.
And such organizations like the NAACP and civil rights organizations and et cetera, all of those are in a real sense influenced
by the Harlem Renaissance, the New Negro movement. Because the NAACP, when you think of NAACP, you think of civil rights leaders. They were much more than that. They helped in the Harlem Renaissance. Like some of those famous people during the Harlem Renaissance were influenced by some of the people who in the NAACP, the music they listen to today, was influenced by what? The New Negro movement.
And Du Bois and all of those individuals played a significant role in it. And you think that the more people learn about it, the more tolerant that they could be toward one another, and et cetera. And you're doing everything that you possibly can in order to try to spread the word.
And before we end off the show today, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Alan Leroy Locke, who basically inspired the New Negro movement and who was basically the cause of it. I mean, because of all his works in the African American community, and I want to thank him for that.
Now, where was he from now?
He was, I'm not sure actually.
But you know that he is one of the most significant aspects of the movement. And I say that primarily because when I first started college, I was also told that same idea, and I was wondering where in the world did you get that idea from? And certainly let me, during this last half a minute, Alana, thank you for bringing that excellent information by. And I think that when you first approached this topic, I think I was somewhat skeptical in reference to it, and I felt that I really ought not to deal with you in reference to this, because it would be quite an embarrassment if you were not as good as you claim that you are. And I think that you demonstrated in a real sense that you gave us some excellent information. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning. Thank you and welcome to the show today. The topic this morning is President Obama's visit to Africa and why some countries are not happy. And we have with us to talk about the visit that the president recently made to Africa and why some countries are not happy, our resident African expert, Dr. Leonard Madu. And of course, Dr. Madu, I think that you've talked about Africa in so many ways on this particular show, and we're certainly delighted to have you back today to talk about what we consider to be a very, very important topic, because I think it, in a real sense, brings Africa within the perimeter of what is going on the national level. Let's allow you, Dr. Madu, to sort of reflect on the president's visit to Africa and why some countries might not be happy about his visit, not necessarily his visit to Africa, but because he did not visit their country specifically, I would imagine. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Well, thanks, for inviting me to your program again. Always a delight, to be here. On June 26th to July the 3rd this year, President Obama will be visiting Africa. He will visit 3 countries on the continent: South Africa, Tanzania, and South Africa, Tanzania, and one other country. Let me trying to remember. Yeah, and one other country. So during his visit, he will discuss bilateral relations with those countries, and economic relations, democratization, etc., etc. Senegal is the third one. Yeah. Now, his first visit to Africa was in 2009.
So we're really talking about the second visit that the president's going to make to Africa. Okay.
Exactly.
And this is a planned visit so far. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay. I see. Good. Very good.
Yeah. And his first visit to Africa was in 2009. When he visited Ghana. And at that time, a lot of countries were also, upset that he didn't visit them. But Obama wanted to use Ghana to highlight the new administration's thinking about Africa insofar as democratization is concerned, respect for human rights and all that. And Ghana has been in the forefront, as far as that is concerned in sub-Saharan Africa. The elections, have been free and fair and devoid of violence and all that. So Obama wanted to use that to say, look, if you want me to visit your country, or if you want the United States to look favorably to your leadership, you need to see what Ghana is doing in terms of democratization, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, all those things we enjoy here. That's why he went to Ghana. Naturally, a lot of countries were upset, but he couldn't visit all countries. Even if he wanted to, there are about 54 countries in Africa. Now, this year, he's going to go to Tanzania, South Africa, and Senegal. These 3 countries. And a lot of countries are already saying, well, why is he not coming to our countries? Nigeria, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, etc., etc. But the fact is that the president cannot visit every country in 54 Africa.
African countries.
Okay? He cannot. Not only because of logistics, but also for financial reasons. This trip, that's a week, is going to cost $100 million. That's, staff and Secret Service and you name it. That's a lot of money. When Clinton visited, it cost about $48 million. And 1990s to 2013 is a long way. So you can see the increase in the
It actually costs that much in terms of the federal treasury paying that much money just to visit these 3 countries in Africa.
Exactly. So you can imagine how much it's going to cost to visit 6, 7, 8 countries at a time. Okay. Secondly, Obama is using these 3 countries again to emphasize the need for political democratization in Africa. South Africa has been having free elections. Since Mandela came out, he handed over to Mbeki. Mbeki stayed and handed over to Jacob Zuma. All have been free and fair elections. Senegal already has a lot of free and fair elections. The last president defeated an incumbent which is very hard to do in Africa. So that's an example of what Obama is talking about. Then Tanzania, has had free and fair elections, even though one party, is dominant, but at the same time, the elections have been transparent.
Very good. Dr. Abdul, we'll stop at this point, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Leonard Madu, and the topic is President Obama's visit to Africa and why some countries are not happy. And Dr. Madu, I think that we tried to at least clear up our own thinking in reference to the president's trip to Africa. And so this is a proposed trip that's coming up, and you believe that it's going to cost at least almost $100 million in order to make a trip to see three countries. Go and explain that to us.
Three countries, Okay, the visit to Tanzania might run into some problems. In 2008, a Tanzanian diplomat, Mr. Alana Mzengi, was charged for human trafficking. He was reported to have kept a domestic servant indoors for 4 years without paying her and other things. So a lawsuit was filed in which the jury gave her $1 million award against him. So he left, and went back to Tanzania. Now he's a special advisor to President Kikwete. And the State Department is worried about that since the president is going to meet with Kikwete. They don't think it's important for Mzengi to hang around. So a lot of the conservatives in Congress has been asking the president to cancel the trip to Tanzania. But I don't think that will happen. I think probably what will happen is that they will keep Mr. Mzengi out of the reception for President Obama. Mzengi, for that matter, has been a frequent visitor here to Nashville. I know him very well. Now, a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa, like they say, think the president should visit them too. Countries like, DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Angola, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, and other countries, believing that the president owes them a visit. But apart from the problem we've already, enunciated, the financial constraints of such a visit, there are countries whose leadership the president wouldn't be too enamored, to meet. When they visit Washington, diplomatic protocol might mandate the president to receive them at the White House or meet them at the United Nations. But the president going to meet them in their own countries becomes a problem. Since Obama came into power, the administration is no more paying lip service to what is happening on the continent of Africa. Before, the president will read the reports from the CIA, the ambassadors and all that, and go with that. Now, Obama is listening to the real people on the ground. In fact, in the White House, there are a lot of Africans who are staffers there now. So he hears directly from the people what is going on and make his own judgment And as an African American, you know, of African parentage, who, you know, has been aware of what's going on there, he has his own idea of who is doing what, unlike the previous presidents. Okay, why that is important here is, one doesn't expect President Obama to go to Malabo, you know, Equatorial Guinea, to meet with President Obiang. Now here is a man who came to power since 1979 after executing his uncle and refuses to leave power. Now all the oil resources of his country belongs to him and his family. So that wouldn't be acceptable for the president to go to Equatorial Guinea when we are talking of human rights here. Obama wouldn't be too comfortable going to Ouagadougou to meet President Compaoré of Burkina Faso, who came to power, shooting his way into power since 1987, suppresses everybody who opposes him. You know, that wouldn't be acceptable. Okay, he wouldn't want to go to Uganda, even though Museveni, you know, is complaining because the U.S. has a security agreement with Uganda insofar as Ugandan troops helping to fight the terrorists in Somalia. But that's a different matter. The United States, the policy now is that we can be friendly with African countries, do business with them and all that, but make sure the leadership understands that that is different from democracy. You know. Now, why should Obama go to an African country to meet with the president who refuses to declare his assets to the people who elected him? While here, that's the first thing the president does. You know, that would be hypocrisy. See, why should Obama go over there, you know, to meet with the president of Gambia, who denies that AIDS exists and that he's a doctor of curing AIDS? Okay? And he's been in power since 1994. That wouldn't be appropriate. You know, why should he go to Republic of Congo to meet with President Sassou Nguesso, you know, who shot himself into power in 1997, you know, suppresses all oppositions? You know, so that's very understandable. If Obama lived in one of those countries, he would either be in jail or dead himself. He wouldn't be able to run for election. Okay, so looking at it that way, that would be not, you know.
Some of these individuals are not good people to be associated with in any regard.
Exactly, because what will happen when Obama visits those presidents, they will turn it around as an endorsement of their policies.
Good.
Okay, that's very important. So the people will think the president coming here to hug and kiss and smooch with them means endorsement of their policies, which is what Obama is trying to say. No, we're not going to do that. Either you know, treat your people like human beings, or we will do business with you, but we won't be what you call your friends. You know, and that is what's going on now. And a lot of them don't understand it, because it's not the former, you know, rules. This is a different rule altogether. And moreover, Obama is also listening to the African American constituency. That he said, hey, you got to do something about Africa. You know, we can't let those leaders be mistreating our people because of doing business with them. We got to separate the two. Yeah, we can get oil from Equatorial Guinea, but we're not going to be seen, you know, hanging around with Obiang anytime soon. And that's very important here.
And so in a real sense, Dr. Madu, as we get ready for this second commercial break, in a real sense, the president's African policy is sort of constrained in reference to the individuals who are in leadership positions in some of these countries. And for him to go there when that leadership is not looking toward the interests of the people, really does not reflect good upon the President of the United States in reference to that. And these leaders will also, as you indicated, turn this around to mean that the President endorses their policies. And so he has to walk sort of a sharp line in reference to that. But still, he does understand that Africa is a country that has a lot of problems, and that ought to be high upon his agenda. Is that essentially what he gets? Absolutely.
The continent has a lot of problems, but you can't solve those problems unless people are free
to
do exactly what they want to do.
Okay, and of course we're going to take this second commercial break.